Hi card makers, Andrea here from Crafts on the Move. At the time of this filming, it is apple picking season here on Long Island, and lucky for me, the past couple of days I have enjoyed the beautiful crisp fall air. Which brings us to the adorable apple barrel pull and slide card featuring products from Lawn Fawn. So this is the super cute card we're going to make, and as you can see, it has the pull and slide, which is so much fun. The three featured products from Lawn Fawn include the Tiny Tag Saying Fall Edition, the Build-A-Barrel Apple Die Set, and the Pull and Slide Surprise Die Set. This is a separate purchase. The apple barrel and the tiny tags are included in your kit. During the video tutorial, I'm going to review your card kit contents, share the supplies and tools required to assemble the cards, and assemble the cards so that you can craft along. Let's dig into the kit and start crafting. Now it's time to go over your kit contents. In addition to the written instructions, colored picture of the sample, and the YouTube tutorial, your kit contents include the Build-A-Barrel Apple Die Set, Tiny Tag Sayings Fall, our die cutting guide, which will tell you how many of each die you need to cut to make one card. So you will multiply the numbers by 3 to make all 3 cards, and you'll have each cutting guide has the color of cardstock that coordinates with those dies as well. The unlabeled bag contents, which is this bag right here, it contains 3 pre-cut white panels. These are to mount your slide base on, and then you will also receive 3 top fold 110-pound A2 card bases and 3 white envelopes. Next up is the paper for ink blending. That bag contains 1 A2 panel labeled stencil. This is the card panel that I will cut to make the stencil to do the mound in the background for your scene. And then you will also receive 6 A2 panels of the white 110-pound hammer mill paper, which is my preferred paper for ink blending. The kit contains 2 bags that are labeled paper for die cutting. In one bag, you will receive 1/2 A2 panel of Lawn Fawn Sunflower, and then a full A2 panel of the same color. Next is on to the Lawn Fawn Chili Pepper cardstock, and there are 5 A2 panels of that color. And then lastly, in that same bag will be 3 A2 panels of the Lawn Fawn paper bag cardstock. Lastly, we have the final item in your kit, which is that second bag labeled paper for die cutting. And in that bag, you will receive 2 Lawn Fawn A2 panels of ground coffee, 2 A2 panels of Fern from Spellbinders, and then 4 A2 panels of classic white cardstock. These are the pieces for your pull tab and your sliders. Now I'm going to review your basic tools, inks, and supplies that you'll need. I'll show you some of the smaller tools, the other tools you will need as well, and they are listed on your written instructions, but you will definitely want your die cutting machine with the plates, low tack tape, adhesive, wet and dry. I'll be using my tape runner and my art glitter glue. I will also be using tweezers, my paper trimmer, my paper piercer, double-sided foam tape, a work surface for ink blending, and wipes. I will also more than likely be using my Marvy Ukidah pickup tool. For this particular card, I am also using my Jelly Roll white opaque pen. This is the Signo. The Jelly Roll brand works great too. I'm also going to be using some of the Stardust Dilutions stickles to give a little bit of sparkle to my yellow bow. If I didn't say it before, I'll also need scissors And then the last thing that I can think of that I need is going to be some ink blending colors. I will be using Distress Oxide Mowed Lawn, Distress Oxide Tumbled Glass, and then just this regular Distress Ink Frayed Burlap. This is for that detailed layer on the apple barrel. And then of course you're going to want the blending brushes to coordinate with those ink blending colors that you have. I mentioned a work surface for the ink blending. I will be using my Altenew sticky mat to ink blend my background colors, but you can use paper, or you can even use a mat, a work surface mat like this, or your glass mat, whatever you want. But I will be using the really cool sticky mat. I love this mat. It's one of my very favorite tools. One thing I want to address with the die cutting is that I went ahead and die cut all my colored cardstock. What you're going to want to do for this image here, which is part of the pull and slide mechanism, is actually ink blend that first and then die cut it with this piece. So that's how I'm going to make my card. I will actually ink blend both the layers, and then one layer I will take and I will die cut with this die, and I'll show you that as we go through the tutorial. Right, now that all the preliminary stuff is out of the way, we are going to start working on assembling the card, which is the best part. At least for me it is. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 1A2 panel that is labeled stencil, and I'm just going to cut a hill with my scissors. And you can draw a line if you want and trace it. I'm just going to freehand it. That's what I did on the sample. And you need to keep both pieces, and I'm going to show you why in just a couple of minutes. But just do a little wavy hill, however you want, like such. And as you can see, I have one stencil. You can reuse the stencil. The other thing you can do is you can turn it around for your second one and make the hill going a different way. But you might need extra cardstock to make a second hill. It just depends on how much wear you put on your stencil that was included in the kit. Once you get your stencil set, you're going to take your work surface, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the Altenew sticky mat, and I'm going to take one of my hammer mill panels and apply it to my sticky mat. One thing I noticed when I was editing the video was the hill on the card I made in the video is a little bit higher than the hill I made on the original. And you can see there's about 1/4 of an inch difference between the two. If you cut your stencil, your A2 panel stencil that's provided, too high, or you want it lower, you can do one of two things. You can either cut another A2 panel, make a different stencil, or you simply just lower your bottom hill closer to the bottom, and that will give you less room on the bottom, so less grass. And then when you line this portion up, you're just going to see more of the top, but you're inking this bottom part, so it won't matter. For me, it just was easier to have the stencils align with that actual A2 card panel, which is why I left it. And the higher hill doesn't bother me at all, but if you do want it a little bit lower, you just simply adjust these pieces when you're stenciling, or you can cut a new stencil and cut your line lower. My work area is set for the ink blending. I have my Distress Oxide Mowed Lawn and Tumbled Glass with my brushes. I have my stencil and one of my A2 hammer mill panels. And then I have the sample here in the camera just so that you can see it. You are going to want to pick the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter. I'm going to start with the bottom, and you can put some low-tack adhesive onto this piece to stick it if you want. I am going to just hold it with my hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ink blend the sky first, and that's the tumbled glass. So I'm going to hold this in place with my hands or hand and ink blend with the tumbled glass all the way up to the top. And like magic, it's done. Actually, what happened was my alarm went off in the middle of the video, and apparently when that happens, it stops recording. I was able to complete adding the tumbled glass. The next step is to remove that stencil that you have, and you're going to take the top portion and line that up with your blue. And I typically just go a little bit above the blue so you get a nice ink blend with the green, and hopefully there will be no white peeking through. If that happens, you just add your stencil and shift it a little bit and do and re-ink a little bit in that white gap. Again, you can tape this on the sides if you want. I will hold it down. We have the stencil lined up, and now I'm going to ink blend the grass. And there we have it. There is our first ink paneled background. Now I'm going to ink the second panel for the same card. So you will ink 2 panels per card. And I'm just gonna apply my hammer mill paper to my sticky mat again. And the one thing I had mentioned previously and why I had cut the hill the way I did was that now I don't have to worry about matching this up, and I can use the top of this stencil for my alignment, and these hills will line up. Otherwise, what you will want to do is take the first one you stenciled and shift it so that your stencil lines up, and then ink. Repeat the ink blending steps on the second panel that you did on the first panel. All right, now my second panel is done, and you can see I got a little bit of green here, so this will be the piece I use for my die cutting. That is it for the blue and green. This is perfect. They're lined right up, so they're going to cut and layer really nicely on the card. I'm going to go ahead and clean this mat, and then I'll get into, we're going to ink blend the detail layer on the barrel next. I'm going to put this brown detail layer piece on my sticky mat, and now I'm going to use my frayed burlap distress ink and darken this detail layer up. All right, now I'm going to glue the detailed barrel piece to the solid barrel base piece, and everything should line up really nice and easy. What I'm doing is allowing this ink to dry a little bit before I die cut it. If you die cut right away, the ink is still sitting on the surface and may transfer to your die cutting plate. So you can either heat set it or just set it aside so some of that pigment ink can get absorbed into the paper. If you do die cut when this ink is still wet, just wipe your die off. Now I'm going to assemble the leaf and the stem of the apple, and it's super easy. I probably had you cut more than you needed, but you're basically going to take your leaf layer and glue it to the top of the stem, the brown stem layer. And I recommend making one of the stem leaves per apple. You may either use more or less in your apple barrel than I did. I will say I gave you the count of the apples for the sample, but you can stack them more or less on however you want and whatever makes you happy. So we have the barrel, the bow, and quite a few of the stems and leaves. Now we're going to assemble the slider part of the card. Once we get this assembled, then we'll work on making our apple barrel pieces. And what you're going to want to do is take your panel that you're going to use to die cut, and this is the panel I'm using because I have a little green over here. And I had showed you the die earlier. So this is the die. This notch is going to be up towards the top of the sky. And you want to try and get this centered as best as you can on your panel. And the reason being is so that you can keep this hill in alignment with your base hill. If you shift this down or raise it up, you're going to end up having your hill shift, which might look nice too because it might give some dimension, but I'm going to keep it the same. So I want to line it up in the center, and then I'm going to put some low tack or repositionable tape on this piece because I don't want this to move. So I'm going to use my Craft Perfect tape. You definitely want to use a very low tack tape, especially if your ink is still wet. And I can tell this ink is still a little wet. I'm going to add the tape to the outside of the inked image or the inked frame. And the reason being is if it sticks, it will pull away the piece that I'm not worried about keeping. So I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine and then I'll be back. One pro tip I want to tell you as well is in addition to the ink transferring to the underside of your die here, it can actually transfer to your plate. So if your ink is still a little wet, you might want to just wipe it off with a baby wipe, your plate here, just in case any of that ink transferred. And I'm going to carefully remove this tape. And now I have my slider, and you can actually save this as a border if you wanted for another card. So that's another pro tip. All right, we're going to go ahead and assemble this slider. So on this score line down here, we're going to push it up towards you. And then you are going to push it down away from you. So this is the mountain. And this is the valley. I did this last time too. I forgot we need score tape for this piece. Well, you can use glue, but I'm going to use score tape. So I will have to go back and add that in to the supplies in the video in a little bit. I'll do that after. But you are going to want this score tape. I'll probably end up putting a text reminder in. So you're just going to add that 1/8 of an inch score tape around right down at the bottom of this score line here. Now we are going to add the slider guides to the back side of this panel, and I have started to double up on this just to add a little extra thickness for the pull and slide. And what I'm going to do is just take my liquid adhesive and apply it right along this side of the cardstock. That's a lot. It's going to ooze out. You don't want this oozing out or it might cause problems for your slider. And then get this slider piece, this guide, as close to the edge as possible. And then just make sure that you don't see the edge at the bottom or the top. So you want to make sure you don't see any of the white poking out, either the top or the bottom. And then I'm going to actually, this time around, add the liquid adhesive right to the one that's already glued in and glue my second one. This is optional, and I actually don't include this in my die cutting guide. I'm just giving a little pro tip for everybody. I like doing this. It's really good for if you're going to add gift cards too, because it creates a little bit more room for that slider card. All right, I'm going to now add the second side. Now this mechanism is ready to attach to your slider piece. This piece is only going to be adhered right now by this piece of tape. And I find it's easier to line this up with the decorated part or the front part down. And then you're going to take this with the nice cut down. And you want this as flat as can be. And you want to make sure these edges are within your slider guide. And then I try not to press down too much on this because I want to make sure from the front that this piece is going to fit. And that looks good. That's a good fit. I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to press down. And at this point, your slider should somewhat work. I see a little bit of white there, so I'm going to just adjust this just a little. There you have it. Now you're going to glue this, the very bottom edge, a little bit of adhesive on your slider guides, and you're going to glue it to that pre-cut panel that I had already cut for you. It's included in your kit. It was in the bag with your card base and your envelopes. Just a light coating of glue because you don't want this piece to get glued down. So now you're going to take your pre-cut piece and it should match flush with this panel that you have. And make sure this runs in and out, or that this slides in and out. You might have to let this glue dry for just a couple seconds. So I'm going to let that sit for a few seconds for the glue to dry. You can add this piece, so just fold down on the score line, and this is going to get glued so that the arrow's pointing up, so it indicates to the person what they need to do with the mechanism. And you're just going to add a little bit of glue on the inside here and just a little bit around that arrow. And slide that right on. And I'm going to trim this white off. Now you can add this panel to your card base, or your card panel. Your base card panel is really what it is. And you can see how my hills line up. I'm going to use tape runner on this. And you can stamp with those funny tiny tag sayings in here if you want, or you can stamp here. Just make sure this is operating properly. I'm going to glue the decorated panel to my card base. And I again am going to use tape runner. There you have it. And now we're going to assemble the apple barrel. And I'm going to pretty much follow the sample. While I was filming this, I thought it would be best to add the stem and the leaf to the apple after I added the apple to the apple barrel, but during the filming decided it was actually easiest to add the stem and leaf to the apple, then add them to the barrel. You're going to see at one point I accidentally glued one or two of the slits where the stems go in shut and had to pry open that little cut in order to tuck in the stem and the leaf. I'm going to take my pen and add some highlights. And I'm going to add the apple barrel to the slider, and you only want to put adhesive in this area. And I'm going to add it right here in the center. And you don't want it hanging off too much because you want to make sure that slides. So this piece needs to be just above the crease there. Next, I'm going to add my bow. I'm doing it this way so that I can just let the stickles dry on the card and I don't have to come back and add anything else. So I'm going to actually apply the stickles right now to this and then just let it dry and your card is done. I hope you enjoyed making these adorable slider cards. Until next time, happy crafting.